Easy now, Grandpa. Don't blow your own foot off, one man jeered, barely holding back laughter. His friend doubled over, mimicking the faint tremble in the old man's hands. Bro, look at him. Can't even grip the thing right. They snickered behind their ear protection, eyes locked on the elderly black man carefully feeding bullets into a magazine. He didn't say a word. But 2 lanes down, a tall man in a Navy SEAL recruiting shirt caught the exchange. He turned, squared his shoulders, and spoke loud enough for the entire shooting range to freeze. On your feet. The snickering stopped. That man trained warriors. Show some damn respect. Silence followed, thick and sharp as gunpowder. If you believe some legacies never fade, say it loud. Respect. Jeremiah Don Pierce never saw himself as anything special. Just a man who answered the call and carried it through. At 83, the mirror didn't flatter. His reflection showed deep creases, a once broad frame softened by time, and silver hair cut tight against his scalp. But his back was still straight, military straight. The arthritis may have taken his knees hostage, but discipline kept him upright. Once a month, no matter the weather, Don made the drive to Clear Point shooting range. It wasn't for show. It wasn't nostalgia. It was to stay connected to the man he used to be, and to remind himself that certain instincts, when earned in blood and fire, never truly leave. That Thursday morning was no different. He arrived just after sunrise. Tucked under his arm, a worn leather case holding the same 1911 pistol he'd trusted half a century ago. To most, it would look antique. To Don, it was an old friend. Balanced, honest, dependable. Like a limb he'd grown himself. The parking lot was already full. Inside, the range buzzed with chatter and clinking brass. Don waited his turn, calm, hands folded in front of him. Behind him, 2 younger men, early 30s, cargo shorts and loud voices, kept sneaking glances. Bet this guy still thinks he's storming Normandy, one mumbled. Yup, just give him a helmet and a time machine, the other snorted. Don didn't flinch. He'd heard worse. He also knew better. He kept his eyes on the safety posters, most of which he'd seen in black and white decades ago. When his name was called, Don stepped forward and signed in with steady, deliberate strokes. The range officer was new, couldn't have been more than 21. He offered a rushed run-through of the rules. Don listened politely, hands folded behind his back. Sir, the officer finished. Any questions? Don met his eyes, a small smile forming. I've been handling this steel longer than you've been alive, he said quietly. But I appreciate the reminder. He took his lane. His spine didn't curve. His grip didn't shake. Because some men don't come to prove anything. They come to remember. I've been shooting since before you were even born, son, Don said calmly, eyes still on the weapon in his hands. Sure thing, Grandpa, the range officer replied, not even glancing up. Lane 7's open. Don moved to his booth without a word, setting his leather case on the counter like it was sacred. Every movement had intention. He opened it, revealing his old 1911 like a museum piece. Polished, aged, and waiting. He began his routine, slow, deliberate checks, slide, safety, sightline, grip. Everything felt familiar. Everything except his hands. As he reached for the first magazine, the tremor crept in. It wasn't violent, not enough to stop him from cooking breakfast or buttoning a shirt. But here, under the sterile glow of fluorescent lights and sharp steel echoes, it betrayed him. His fingers shook. Not wildly, just enough. From the next booth over came a familiar voice, soaked in sarcasm. Yo, Mark, look at this. Dude's hands are dancing. Don kept working. Careful there, Gramps, the man continued, louder now. Hope that thing's pointed down when it slips. Don gritted his jaw and loaded another round. The voice didn't quit. We calling an ambulance now or waiting till he shoots his own foot off? Laughter. Not polite. Not nervous. Mean. A phone came out, its lens glinting in the corner of Don's vision. Recording. Still, Don didn't flinch. He finished loading, clicked the mag into place, chambered around with a sharp, practiced motion. Then he stepped forward, squared up, and lifted the pistol. Both hands on the grip, arms firm, the tremble still there. But something shifted. As soon as the iron sights lined up with the target downrange, something ancient took over. Something older than arthritis, deeper than muscle memory. His breathing slowed, his shoulders dropped, and his heartbeat seemed to vanish into silence. He fired, 6 rounds, 6 sharp cracks. Each shot hit dead center. By the time the smoke cleared, the paper target had 6 tight holes all clustered together, close enough to cover with a poker chip. The silence behind him didn't last. The man from lane 8 finished his own shoot and swaggered past Don's booth with forced bravado. He caught a glimpse of Don's target, whistled loud, and gave a slow, sarcastic clap. "Well, damn, Pops. Not bad. For someone due for a walker," he said, making sure the others heard. "You get a discount at the cemetery, too?" His friend snorted behind him. "Nah. He probably has a loyalty card at the retirement home." Don didn't take the bait. He didn't even glance their way. He placed the pistol down gently, muzzle forward, clicked on the safety. He exhaled slowly. His body might have aged. His fingers might tremble. But the fire? The skill? The discipline? That never left. He reached for his second magazine. The men were still chuckling. But this time, something in the air had changed. The laughter sounded a little more forced, and the man at lane 8 didn't seem so amused anymore. Don slid a second magazine from his case. The tremor returned instantly, pulsing through his fingers as if trying to remind him it was still there. He ignored it. Other shooters had noticed now. A couple glanced sideways, expressions tight with judgment, but lips sealed. One woman, maybe in her 50s, shook her head faintly in that quiet, dismissive way people do when they think they're being subtle. She turned back to her own target without a word. A young range staffer glanced up from his phone, saw the trembling hands, blinked, then shrugged, and went right back to scrolling. Don centered himself, breathed deep. He wasn't embarrassed. He'd walked with this shaking for nearly 30 years. Parkinson's, the doctor had told him when he was just 52. Early onset. Manageable, they'd said. Progressive, they'd added later. But Don never saw it as a defeat. He didn't fight the tremor. He trained with it, around it, through it. He had to. And every time his hands betrayed him, he reminded himself what that old rifle meant, and what steadiness had come to mean in his life. The memory came suddenly. Vietnam, 1968. He was knee-deep in brush, breath shallow, sweat stinging his eyes. His spotter, a kid from Louisiana with nervous hands and a crooked grin, had watched Don's rifle tip shake ever so slightly before every shot. "How do you stop it like that, Pierce?" the kid had whispered, eyes wide. Don's reply had been quiet, calm, and honest. "You don't stop the tremor," he'd said. "You let it happen before, not during. The shake's just your body getting ready to be still." That line had stuck with him, became part of how he taught later when he'd trained others. "Respect the tremor," he used to say in classrooms and firing pits. "It's not weakness. It's the body gathering calm." Now, standing in lane 7, Don lifted the 1911 again. The shaking didn't fade, but it didn't matter anymore. The sights found their home. The weight in his chest settled. His fingers squeezed. 6 more shots. 6 more center hits. Not an inch outside the sweet spot. Down the row, a man stepped forward from lane 10, silently watching. He wore jeans, a navy blue polo, and the kind of haircut you didn't need to ask about. His stance was loose, but his eyes missed nothing. Lieutenant Commander James Briggs, Navy SEAL recruiter. He wasn't there by accident. He'd been making rounds across local ranges for the past few weeks, watching for the kind of discipline and form you couldn't fake. And something about the old black man down at lane 7 had stopped him cold. It wasn't the precision. Plenty of shooters had tight groupings. It was the stillness before each trigger pull, the breath control, the focus. There was nothing random in that man's movement, just purpose. Briggs narrowed his eyes and pulled out his phone. He typed the name he'd caught at sign-in. Don Pierce. A few seconds passed. Slow signal. A loading bar crawled. Then, results. Army veteran, long-range specialist, decorated marksman. Briggs didn't smile. He just watched. Because every once in a while you didn't just witness skill. You witnessed legacy. After a long pause and spotty connection, the screen lit up with a forgotten record tucked deep inside a military archive. Master Sergeant Jeremiah Don Pierce, 1965 to 1993. Decorated sniper, Vietnam and Gulf War veteran. Architect of the Pierce method, now used across elite military sniper programs. Credited with training over 140 SEAL marksmen during Desert Storm. Briggs stared at the screen, then back at lane 7. The man being mocked for trembling hands was a legend, etched into the foundations of modern military marksmanship. They laughed at age, they filmed a tremor, and they had no idea they were watching the man whose fingerprints still shaped every elite marksman in the Navy. If you feel that twist in your gut, write one word. Unfair. Briggs slipped the phone into his pocket. His stance shifted. No more bystander. He moved with quiet determination, down the line of booths, through the murmuring air. His civilian clothes didn't matter. The way he walked told everyone exactly who he was. Two shooters had returned to their lane, chatting over new paper targets. Briggs approached them without pause. No hesitation, no anger, just command. He stopped inches from their booth, voice low but sharp as broken glass. Stand up. They froze, looked at each other, then slowly rose, uncertain but unable to ignore the weight behind those two words. Briggs didn't even look at them. His eyes were locked on the veteran at lane 7. "You know who that man is?" he said, his voice loud enough to cut across conversations and small talk. They didn't answer. "That's Master Sergeant Don Pierce," Briggs said, letting the name land with force. "He wrote the manual your instructors studied. He trained the marksmen who trained today's SEALs. You ever heard of the Pierce method? That's him." Confusion morphed into regret on their faces. Briggs went on. "When I was 19, crawling through the dust at Coronado, they showed us his shooting drills before we even held a rifle. When I passed my sniper cert, I got handed a photo of his grouping. My CO said, 'Beat that, and maybe you'll have a name worth remembering.'" The entire range began to quiet. Even the ones who didn't hear the words felt the shift in air pressure, the change in tone. Some pulled out their earbuds. Others just stood still, watching the confrontation unfold like a slow-burning fire. In the center of it all, Don kept shooting, one bullet at a time. Breath, pause, fire. The form was still perfect. One of the younger men fumbled for words. "We didn't know," he mumbled. "We were just messing around, didn't mean anything." Briggs didn't even blink. "You don't mess around with legacy," he said. "Not when it's standing 3 feet from you." He left them frozen in place. Then he walked over to lane 7, his boots firm, shoulders square. He waited at the edge, patient, not wanting to interrupt the rhythm of a master at work. Don finally lowered the pistol and looked over, his expression calm but curious. Briggs raised a hand, not to shake, but to salute. When Don set his pistol down, his hand steady at last, he turned to see the younger man standing tall beside him. Lieutenant Commander Briggs stood at rigid attention, his palm rising in a flawless salute. "Master Sergeant Pierce," he said clearly. "Lieutenant Commander James Briggs, SEAL Team 4. My instructor trained under you, sir." Don's brows lifted, just slightly, but it was the kind of surprise that warmed rather than unsettled. After a brief pause, he returned the salute, this time with his left hand, slow but precise. "At ease, Commander," Don said, his voice carrying more strength now than at any point that day. "We're not on parade ground." "With respect, Master Sergeant," Briggs replied, lowering his hand. "Some men still earn the ceremony." Then he turned, facing the whole range. His voice shifted, no longer personal, but projected, trained to reach ears even under steel roofs and echoing gunfire. "You think a shaky hand is something to laugh at?" he called out. "Try keeping one still through a monsoon for 9 hours, waiting for one shot that saves 30 lives. The room hushed. Even those with hearing protection paused, glancing up. "Try staying motionless while every joint in your body begs for relief," Briggs continued. "Because someone else's life depends on your control." That's what this man did, over and over. The tension in the room wasn't fear, it was awareness, the kind that cuts through ego and reaches bone. The range manager arrived, pacing quickly, sensing the weight in the air. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, eyes flicking between Briggs and the bystanders. Briggs gave a thin smile. "No issues. Just making sure we understand who we're lucky enough to share space with." He motioned toward Don, still standing in lane 7 with the calm of someone who didn't need to speak to command attention. The manager followed his gaze, eyes narrowing. Then his posture shifted. "Wait, Master Sergeant Pierce?" His voice dipped into reverence. "You're the Don Pierce?" Don gave a faint nod. "Retired a long time ago. No need for ceremony." But the manager wasn't letting that moment slip away. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for the disrespect earlier," he said, shooting a firm glare at the two younger shooters now lingering off to the side. "Lane 7 is yours. No charge. Ever." The room was quiet. The sound of a bullet casing hitting the floor might have echoed like thunder. One of the young men, the one who had recorded Don earlier, stepped forward slowly, phone in hand. His face looked different now. No smirk, just shame. "I'm deleting this video, sir," he said, voice quieter than before. "And I'm sorry for how I acted. My grandfather served in Desert Storm. He might have trained with you. Don nodded once. Not harsh, not warm. Acknowledgement, but not forgiveness. There was no performance in his reaction. Just grace earned over a lifetime. The second man, quieter throughout, removed his baseball cap and held it against his chest in a late but honest gesture of respect. Don's expression remained steady, neither proud nor bitter, just still. Because real strength doesn't rise for applause. It endures. This wasn't about victory. It wasn't about revenge. It was the stillness of a man who had walked through enough fire to know which burns mattered. Don Pierce had long since made peace with the quiet truths of life, that human cruelty is often loud, and human grace usually whispers. Neither shocked him anymore, but what he didn't expect was how quickly the world would come knocking. What began as a quiet, almost forgotten Thursday morning had transformed by the weekend. A woman who had been 2 lanes over, the same one who hadn't spoken, just watched, posted a short story on social media that same day. 2 men mocked an old man at the range for shaking. A Navy SEAL walked up and told them they were laughing at a legend. I'll never forget what that felt like. The post was brief. No names. Just truth. And that was enough. It spread across veteran pages within hours. Military circles picked it up the next morning. By the time Sunday rolled around, training academies, forums, and active duty groups were passing around a once-forgotten article like a sacred relic. The man behind the method. How Don Pierce changed sniper training forever. The article highlighted Don's doctrine, the Pierce method, and its influence on modern marksmanship. It traced his decades of service, his battlefield record, and the hundreds of SEALs who had passed through his instruction during Operation Desert Storm. One caption went viral. He was mocked for trembling hands. He was saluted for steady vision. Young trainees began posting photos of themselves in low shooting positions, mimicking Don's signature posture. Several had no idea who he was until that week. Now they called him the quiet giant of sniper history. By the following Thursday, Clearpoint Range felt different. When Don arrived, early, as always, there was a shift in the air. No crowd, no announcement, just reverence. Lane 7 had changed. Above it hung a new bronze plaque, modest but gleaming, reserved for Master Sergeant Donald Pierce, trainer of quiet legends. The range manager met him at the entrance. "We thought it was time people knew," he said. Don just nodded, touched but unsure what to say. He'd never asked for recognition. He didn't wear honor like a medal. He carried it more like a quiet weight, worn into the bones. He made his way to Lane 7 and set down his old case. The soft thud of it landing was familiar, grounding. The world might have shifted outside, but here, this place, this ritual, remained his own. As he unzipped the leather, something caught his eye. 2 lanes over, a teenage girl stood beside her father, gripping a small pistol with both hands. Her stance was rigid, her elbows locked. She pulled the trigger, flinched, and missed by a wide margin. Her father stepped in with advice, well-meaning but misinformed, repositioning her awkwardly. The girl glanced sideways and caught Don watching. She didn't look embarrassed. Instead, she squared her shoulders, set the pistol down, and spoke across the partition. "Sir, do you ever miss?" Don paused. The smile that touched his lips was quiet, reflective. "Only when I lose sight of the reason I started," he said. She tilted her head, taking that in more seriously than he expected. "Would you show me?" He looked down at the weapon he'd been preparing. The tremor in his fingers was still there. It always would be. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had asked, not because of reputation, but because of what they'd seen. Don gently placed his pistol aside. He stepped into her lane, slow and measured. He didn't need to explain who he was. He simply guided her hands, adjusted her fingers, softened her shoulders. He didn't say much, just enough. The rest was silent understanding. The father stepped back, watching, not offended, grateful. Around them, shooters returned to their drills, but those close enough to notice paused, not for show, not out of awe, just to witness something passing down. Not medals or stories, but skill wrapped in humility. Dawn stepped back once her grip was corrected. She turned, fired again. The shot hit clean. Her face lit up, not with triumph but comprehension. He nodded once. Approval, not praise. Then returned to his own lane. As he took position beneath the plaque that bore his name, something in the room settled. Because true mastery isn't just about where the bullet lands. It's about why it's fired in the first place. And some hands, no matter how they tremble, never forget that.